Welcome to the Catholic Investment Services Foundation's Considerations 101 webinar. In this session today, you will hear from Catholic fiduciaries sharing practical advice on structuring and forming Catholic foundations and trusts from the ground up. In today's session, participants can ask questions throughout it, so please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen to ask any questions. Our audience is muted, and this webinar is recorded. My name is Zela Astarjian, and I'm Managing Director of Catholic Investment Services, and I'm your host today. Enormous thanks to our accomplished panelists, whom you're going to meet very shortly. Catholic Investment Services was founded by some of the investment industry's most respected leaders to address the investment challenges faced by the Catholic organizations. We are a Catholic nonprofit helping other nonprofits access sophisticated institutional strategies without sacrificing alignment. You've received some biographical information on our speakers, but I would like to emphasize a few highlights on each of our speakers. Paulita Pike is our moderator today. She's also a trustee of Catholic Investment Services and managing partner of the Chicago office of Ropes and Gray. Paulita represents mutual funds and their boards, as well as investment advisors throughout the country, and works with such industry leaders as Invesco, Prudential, Northern Trust, and Calamos. She also shapes the next generation of legal minds by serving as an adjunct professor of law at Northwestern Law School and the University of Notre Dame Law School. She's passionately devoted to the arts. Paulita has served on numerous boards, including the Art Institute of Chicago, and also the Chicago Shakespeare Theater, which is one of my favorite board assignments that Paulita has. Next, Elizabeth Tomlin. She's general counsel at the Archdiocese of the Military in Washington, D.C. She has extensive expertise in nonprofit management and growth. She served as general counsel for the Archdiocese of Military since 2016. Elizabeth has particular expertise in establishing religious affiliated nonprofits and charitable foundations. As an Army spouse, she has served as a consultant for numerous military affiliated nonprofits, including corporate governance, fundraising, donor relationships, and strategic communications. When she's not practicing law, Elizabeth writes for Ave Maria Press. She's also the author of Joyful Momentum, which is a growing and sustaining vibrant women's group. She's currently a candidate for a master's in theology at the University of Notre Dame. And as a Lourdes Fellow, this is a fellowship for outstanding lay leaders in the Catholic Church. Next, John Schlageter is the managing partner as JKT Group, which is a consulting firm that specializes in the operation and growth of charitable organizations. John is a lawyer by trade and practice. He's an expert in the administration and development of religious charitable trusts and foundations, and provides executive director services to a number of the firm's clients. He received his undergraduate and law degree from the Catholic University of America. John was also the first executive director at Bethlehem University Foundation and served 9 years as the general counsel for the Archdiocese of the Military. In addition to his work at JKT Group, John is general counsel of the Eparchy of St. Maroon of Brooklyn and the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, and he also serves on numerous charitable boards. John is a native of Hollywood, Florida, and lives in DC with his 2-year-old son and their poodle, Lena. Last but not least, Corey Howitt. He's the executive director at the Catholic Community Foundation of the Archdiocese of New Orleans. He's an extensive background working in nonprofits, including on the development side of the mission. Corey is a native of New Orleans. Corey's business background started when he and his associate established the Smoothie King franchises in the Las Vegas Valley. This motivated Corey to take some of the entrepreneurial expectations of the business industry into the nonprofit sector. His nonprofit development experience broadened as the executive director for Boys Hope Girls Hope, where he served for over 9 years. During this time, Corey co-founded Alive in You, a national Catholic youth conference and service camp that thrives today. Corey also serves as the president of I Give Catholic, which is the U.S. Catholic Church's Giving Day. Before I turn this over to our moderator, Elizabeth Tomlin is going to lead us with a short prayer. Elizabeth?
Sure, we'll pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for the opportunity to join together through technology to talk about how we can foster Catholic charitable foundations and religious entities. We pray especially for the intercession of Saint Irenaeus, whose feast day is today, that we might have the courage to serve the church as he did, bishop and martyr. We pray that we would follow his example in teaching divine truth, preserving the unity of our church in all the work we do. And through Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Paulita, take it away. Thank you, everybody.
Elizabeth, thank you. That was beautiful. So we are talking, as Zela has said, about foundations, and we thought we would just begin with some level setting. And Corey, why don't I direct the first question to you, which is, if you're a Catholic entity, why do you want a foundation?
Sure. So thank you, Paulita, and thank you for everyone joining us today. You know, that it's a fantastic question, because it really helps you and forces you to examine the why, which every foundation should have. There should be a mission behind every time that you think through another structure and entity, that you're being very intentional of what you're doing and why you're creating it. There's obviously multiple tentacles to that answer, and there's everything from the legal side to the practical. But the reality behind the why specifically for a foundation is that it helps protect the very intentions of why a donor or why an individual or an organization would want to be able to create a foundation to begin with. And I think when you examine that question, not just as a way that you're running out of fear of something, or that you're doing something out of your own practicality, that it allows you to be able to think through the infrastructure that's needed to be able to help make sure and sustain the ministry that we've been entrusted to. And so the short is that it's a very intentional process that you have to go through, and it forces you to be able to ask the question why and answer it. And then when you do that, then it makes and realizes the answers to many of the questions that come up is this worth it? And is this something that would help kind of continue and sustain the ministry that we're trying to? And so that very nature is a beautiful process that not only is an encouragement to you to be able to go through, but allows you to be able to really place the mix of inside of a ministry, the head and the heart. It allows the heart to be answered, but it's then also a very practical thing to do, again, on the legal side and on the protection side of many ministries.
So it sounds, Corey, like the thing that is the first question is also the thing that will allow you to keep a focus on what is important.
Yeah, and isn't mission drift something that we all have seen or experienced inside of the nonprofit world, especially the church? Like, you start a ministry and you're like, oh, we're going to serve this, and then next thing you know, 3 years later, a board might cycle through, or and when that happens, especially when you remove yourself from this, a foundation, I think, is one of the most selfless acts that you can provide, because what you're doing is that you're allowing yourself and your needs to kind of be secondary to what the entity it is that you're setting up and creating. And that this isn't just some way, again, there is always ways through or around something. And it's not just our tool to be able to use for our gain, but that with the mission connection is that you're doing this very intentionally to be able to help support something. And so that's an important process, that it's to see this as really a selfless act to create the structure around doing something for others, but doing it in a way that's really structured and ordered, if I can, ordered in a way that helps its greatest purpose.
Great. So John, are there specific models of foundation or some key characteristics of certain types of foundations?
Sure. In dealing with my clients, I think that there are three types of models that I've seen employed within the diocesan structure for diocesan foundations. The simplest and the one that I think was sort of the model that was first adopted within the diocesan structures was either a trust or a foundation whose job it was to hold endowed assets. So it was a separate entity. It managed and held those assets, managed and directed by its board of directors, 3 to 5, maybe 6 to 7 directors. And every year that entity would take a draw from the endowed assets and make a gift to the beneficiary organization. In that structure, it's usually the diocese or another entity that's doing the fundraising, general fundraising operations, but then endowed gifts are made to the diocese and then the diocese makes a gift to the foundation. I think the second structure that we've seen be employed more recently is the structure whereby the diocesan foundation is a 10 to 15 member board of directors. It manages those assets, but it also has a fundraising component that goes out and raises money for endowed gifts and sometimes some annual fund money in order to fund operations or in order to make grants for current needs, board designated funds for current needs. And I think that there's a third model that I'm seeing more and more within my client base, where all fundraising for all of the apostolates of the diocese are being put under the umbrella of the foundation, and fundraising and asset management is totally separate from the diocese and from its apostolates. And I think we're going to see that trend continue, because I think it's a model that we've found is working, because putting everything under one umbrella, you don't have various apostolates tripping over each other and poaching donors. You have all of the diocesan structure working together under the umbrella of the foundation to support the ministries entrusted to the bishop's care. And I think Corey can probably speak to that at some point, because that's the model, to the best of my knowledge, that's the model that they're employing in New Orleans.
And so, John, you've outlined sort of 3 types of foundations. What are the pros and cons to each? It sounds like the last model is one which, for the reasons you stated, has really been gaining popularity. But could you just go through each and just outline some pros and cons to each of those models?
Sure. The first model of a foundation holding funds, it's a simple model. You can and in fact, you don't need a foundation to do that. You can use a trust and just have the trustees make distributions. It's very simple. It doesn't involve upsetting the waters. It's a way to protect the assets, and it's a way to ensure that the donor restrictions placed on gifts are maintained by the trust of the foundation. I think the pitfall to that, though, is that it in many ways entangles itself with the diocese, because most of those trustees or directors are going to be members of the diocesan curia. In my experience, are members of the diocesan curia, and I don't think donors like that. And I think it lends itself to manipulation in many ways. The second model, that is the model that I've used for one of my clients at present, is the diocesan office does the fundraising, but as soon as that gift is made, it's made directly by the donor to the foundation. I like this model because it allows for that asset management, but it also makes sure that the foundation is doing what the foundation is supposed to do. It's raising money for its endowments, and it doesn't have to worry about raising funds for other things. The third model, the benefit to the third model of the umbrella organization is that you're working in tandem. No one's working in silos. The different ministries are collaborating, because all of the fundraising is, at the end of the day, answerable to the executive director, who then has to respond back to his or her board of directors. But I think one of the pitfalls of that is that in doing so, if you're going to put all of the assets and all of the fundraising of the various apostolates of the diocese under one umbrella, it does get a little entangled once again with the diocese, because you're going to have the director of schools or the director of youth ministry saying, I need XYZ amount of money, and it's your job to raise it. And in the end of the day, the foundation is not responsible to the bishop or to the various apostolates. It's responsible to its board of directors.
Great, thank you, John. So you spoke a fair amount about fundraising or funding out of the foundation. Elizabeth, what kinds of things are funded by a foundation?
That's a good question. And it begins fundamentally at the purpose of the foundation. What is the mission of that foundation? So with the diocesan foundation, you might be able to support an endowed fund for seminarians, an endowed fund for retired priests, an endowed fund for evangelization. If there's a particular group that your diocese is passionate about, let's say young adult outreach or a social justice issue that's not already incorporated within your local Catholic charities, that might be something that's funded through an endowed gift in the foundation. Another endowed fund that's particularly useful to a foundation that supports a diocese or an archdiocese is a general fund. Is a general fund from which the board of directors of the foundation can look at particular ministry projects, opportunities for outreach, and make a gift. In some cases, it's a general endowed fund that goes to support the mission of the foundation, which might be to propagate the Catholic faith within the diocese or something like that. It could even go to Catholic schools, even if your Catholic schools are simply incorporated. So there's flexibility there, but the endowment matches the intent of the donor, and you have the ability to get creative with it.
And do you find, Elizabeth, that the purpose of the foundation informs what the board makeup is?
I think so to some extent. I think within your board of directors, you want people who are passionate about the mission of the foundation, right? But you also want within the board of directors people who have the expertise to administer funds, to be good custodians of an endowed fund. So you would want probably a mix of perhaps clerics and lay people, and a mix of expertise, some people who are involved in finance, people who are practitioners within ministries. So it's important that your board of directors has a makeup that represents the mission and the expertise to be good custodians of.
Corey, how do you think about the makeup of the board and the role that directors play?
The fascinating piece about directors is it goes back to one of the early boards I sat on, and there was a federal judge actually that was sitting on this board, and he always said, you know, Corey, expect you're always going to want somebody on a board that has a different opinion than you, and yet we know the intuitive nature is to be able to get everybody that's head shakers, like, and just like, oh yeah, this works, and great job. And sometimes it seems like the path to least resistance. But what I observed and lived through that wisdom that he shared was the fact that a diverse population and a diverse set of skills, from CPA to attorney to these different resources, not only allow, and personalities and gender, all these things kind of allow your makeup to be not only kept according to mission, but I think the reality that and again, our world doesn't match much with this, but is to be able to find consensus, and that consensus is really the work of the Holy Spirit. And that when you are able to allow the Holy Spirit into these board meetings, and that you have varied opinions, you're coming at the end of the day with something that really feels like it's a collective agreement or push on the governance of the organization that would mirror what would be the commitment to the greater good. And so I think that it's hard. We started a couple of years back to be able to have a spreadsheet of where they live, and this is a little geeky, but we plotted it on a map. Does it really reflect our community? Does it really reflect the people that we want this to be a representation for? So going back to that word intentional, I think it takes some intentional steps, not just people that shake their head yes to you, but really finding people that are connected and committed to the mission, but also aren't just the same homogenous kind of view.
And John, how have you seen different backgrounds and different perspectives contribute in the boardroom. And are there any qualities beyond the professional qualifications that you think about when you think about board members?
Yes. When dealing with board members, I think that you're always going to deal with a certain percentage of board members who are there because they think that the seat on the board makes them important. And I think that that's the worst kind of board member because they don't participate. And that's why I'm very much in favor of term limits, because I think a cycling of the board is very important. But I think when you're looking at a board, you want people who understand the mission, are committed to the mission, are willing to stand up to the leadership and say, this is right or this is wrong. And I think that when you're looking at a board, you need certain, depending on what the foundation is charged with doing, you need some people who really understand investments, because you need an investment committee that will understand and make sure that the funds that are entrusted to the foundation are being invested properly. You need a good legal governance committee. You need a few lawyers who are just making sure that the institution stays on the rails. And if there's anything I've learned in my years of working with Catholic nonprofits, if the road to hell is paved with good intentions, the road to heaven is paved with a good audit committee, a solid audit committee made of lawyers and accountants who are in many ways quasi-independent from the rest of the board, are what can save a foundation should it go a little off the tracks.
Okay, so an audit committee is critical. Are there other committees that you would think most foundations would have?
Yes, I think that the audit committee is critical. I think a legal governance committee is incredibly necessary. I have found with a number of my clients that they have wonderful bylaws, but no one has ever read them. Or they have awful bylaws that were drafted by some lawyer, not even drafted by some lawyer. He went into some cabinet, pulled out the drawer, found some bylaws, dusted them off, changed the names and the faces and said, here are your bylaws, and no one's looked at them ever since. I think the bylaws in many ways have to be a living document, and it's a governance committee that keeps that a living document. I think a nominations committee is also key to have good board members, and to have new board members keeps the institution going. And I think that if your bylaws allow for 25 directors and you don't have 25 directors, your audit committee has failed you, because those are seats that are empty. So a good, strong committee, a strong executive committee, and I think a strong fundraising committee, because if you're looking at a foundation that's doing asset management, certainly you don't need a fundraising committee. But if you're looking to grow in these endowed funds and grow the corpus of the endowment, you need strong donors and others who understand fundraising to be able to push the development team forward and to really help move the institution forward. At the end of the day, the fundraising and the governance and the operations of the foundation are entrusted to a staff, but it's the board that is responsible for the success of that staff. So I really think that your top fundraisers shouldn't be the development officers. It should be the members of the board of directors.
Elizabeth, John has referenced several times boards of different sizes. Can you discuss a little bit the correlation between sort of the size of the board and the number of committees?
Sure, that's a good question. So the sizes, if you are a board that's going to have a number of committees, so legal governance, an audit committee, a nominations committee, you'll want to have more board members in order to support robust committee work. You don't, at least in my opinion, I would not want the work of a foundation happening with the entire board of directors in the room. I don't think it's a good use of anybody's time. But a robust committee structure and robust committee members drawn from that board, a larger board of directors, spreads the work. It makes for a lighter lift. And in a smaller board of directors, your directors, their work with the foundation on which they're serving, it's probably not their only job. So to overburden a director, a member of your board of directors, may actually cause that member to kind of ghost the foundation, because the job was more than they signed up for. So I think a larger board lends itself to a more robust committee structure. But the board itself can guide those committee structures through policies, through instruction to the committee, which gives that smaller subset of your board direction as to what they're expected to do within the committee, and sets the vision from the larger board.
And I think one of the benefits of that, of the committee structure, is that you can put people on committees who are not members of the board. And I think that that's a good way, not only to engage people from outside of the institution to participate, but it's a good way to sort of test whether or not you think somebody might be a good board member. It gives.
And to both of those points, and I think that this is something that when you see these documents, your bylaws as living documents that you need to continue to be aware of, to revise, to amend. We had to listen to the people. The reality is our non-board committee members, we went back and changed in our bylaws to be able to have 1-year terms appointed each year, because you also need to be able to have a proper, if you will, feeding of board members by giving them some test grounds, but also not expecting a non-board committee member to sit on something for 6 years or 3 years. So if you're not looking at your bylaws, you could be enacting things that aren't really what's happening in practice. And so you want to be able to make sure that you're very intentional when you create these things, that you not only give a chance through your nominating or through your bylaws committee, which we both have, but you're doing that in such a way that's then building out the best practice for your foundation.
Well, Corey, both you and John have referenced sort of these charter documents, articles of agreement or incorporation and bylaws. Elizabeth, are there sort of some best practices around those charter documents, things that you would want to be sure are reflected in, or at least have been thought about in the context of setting up a foundation?
Sure. So within your charter documents, you have your articles of incorporation, right? Which is a public document, and there's some statutory requirements to name your charitable purpose to comply with the 501c3 code. But for a Catholic foundation, I like to bring out both the canonical aspects of what the foundation might be doing, the particularly Catholic aspects, as well as the civil aspects. So for diocesan work, I bring out the temporal and canonical nature of the work, or even the purpose of the funds, so that it's clear that the foundation or the diocese or the school or whatever the organization is has a conspicuously Catholic identity in its very chartering documents. And I think that's the tone for the entire governance of the organization, whether it's foundation, ministry. So that's one thing that I always try to incorporate is those civil aspects, as well as naming the canonical aspects. That's one thing. And then within the bylaws, and I tend not to get very specific in articles of incorporation, but within bylaws, because they are a much more malleable document, I tend to get pretty specific about committee structures, nominations of officers, removal of officers, and even term limits. So however you, especially planning the exit plan, what does an exit plan look like for a board member, I think is an important thing to place in your bylaws from the start as well.
John, so Elizabeth just mentioned that bylaws are more malleable, and they're a different document really than the declaration or the articles of incorporation. Can you discuss a little bit more the interplay between those documents? And then to Elizabeth's last point, which is how to remove a director, how have you seen that reflected in the context of a set of bylaws?
Sure. There's a few options for removal of directors, but first I'll talk about the Articles of Incorporation. The Articles of Incorporation in most states are the document that you file with the Secretary of State of the state that says you are a corporation. You have come together to create a corporate body, a legal entity. And then within it, it has certain requirements. One of the top questions that I think most states ask is whether or not the corporation will have a corporate member or a corporate membership. And I think that that's something we can talk about a little bit more as we go through this, because a number of organizations have already asked questions about how do you ensure that when you create the foundation that the beneficiary or the governing institution, be it the religious community or a diocese, still maintains that control. The corporate membership is the way by which you do so. But the articles are the official document with the state that says you are a corporation and these are the requirements of the corporation. the articles and the bylaws cannot conflict with each other. And I think that that's something that's very important. If your articles of incorporation, and I've seen this in some states, say that the corporation will have 5 board members, and then the bylaws say 15, the bylaws are wrong. You have to amend the articles of incorporation to make sure that they're in alignment. It's easy to file articles of incorporation in some states. It's a standard form. In other states, it's a rather lengthy document. I think when looking at articles of incorporation, I always think it's better to file 5 to 10 pages of articles of incorporation based on the standard form by the USCCB rather than sending in the 1-page state document, because I think you help preserve the religious nature, as Elizabeth touched on, of the institution. I think if you're looking at creating a corporation in your particular state, of a foundation in your particular state, you have to see as to whether or not your state has specific legislation for religious corporations. And then you have to decide whether or not you want to be identified as a religious corporation. There are a number of states where churches had to be incorporated. I think New York is a state where they have religious corporations. Most of the Northeast, especially New England, has statutes for religious corporations. In fact, Connecticut has one where the corporation is required to have 5 corporate members, and that's a response to trusteeism from the 1800s. So all of that to say, each state is unique and specific. So when you're doing so, you really want to find an attorney who not only understands the laws of the particular state in which you're in, but who understands nonprofits and probably religious nonprofits. I think that that's a big step forward because there are a number of questions that just vary state by state. In fact, New York, as counsel to the Eparchy of St. Mary of Brooklyn, I can tell you that when you create a religious corporation in that state, you don't file with the Secretary of State, you actually file with the county. And then religious corporations have different filing requirements from general nonprofit corporations. So all of that to make a plug for my people. If you want to do this right, get a good lawyer who knows what they're doing. The removal of directors, I think that the way that I've seen it usually is that you can ask a director to resign. You can have a majority vote of the board to have someone removed. Or there's the corporate membership. And I think within the corporate membership, that's a corporate membership is a 2-tiered board where you have the corporate members, the board of directors, and then you have the people actually running the institution on the ground. A corporate member is usually the bishop or the religious superior. As an example, for Bethlehem University Foundation, which is a work of the Holy See and the De La Salle Christian Brothers, the 2 corporate members were the cardinal prefect of the Congregation for Oriental Churches and the brother general of the De La Salle Christian Brothers. I think in most diocesan structures, it's the bishop is the corporate member. In most religious communities, you could put the provincial, or you could put the superior general, or you could put the provincial council or similar organization as the corporate membership. And within that corporate membership, within your bylaws and within your articles, there are certain reserved powers. And this is where the Catholic part really plays in, that the corporate members are there to preserve the Catholic identity of the institution. And those rights are appointing up the auditor, overseeing transactions over $100,000, the confirmation of the election of officers, and the removal of officers, and a few other, that you can't change the philosophy without the approval of the corporate members. You can't amend the bylaws or the articles without the corporate members. But it's really in the confirmation and the election and the removal of directors and officers that the corporate members play a key role. And I think that one of the biggest pitfalls is the corporate members just don't meet. And so you have a board of directors that's existing out in space, but it's never been confirmed. So they're not a valid board.
So removal of directors, a very tricky topic. Sometimes conflicts of interest can be an equally tricky topic. Corey, how have you seen, not the conflicts play out, but how have you seen foundations address the need to identify conflicts, elevate conflicts, deal with conflicts?
Well, we are the church and we don't do any of that well. So I, in half humor, I say that just because I think that is one of the challenges that I've seen most, which is that there tends to be kind of this like non-communication about it. And I think that that's the beauty of strong bylaws and strong articles, is that you have something to be able to talk through this about, not necessarily just opinion. And so what happens is when you don't have strong articles and strong documents, then what happens is it becomes harder to be able to deal with the issues of conflicts because you don't feel like you have something really supporting you. And I think that that's probably the biggest challenges, is that when you get caught behind the ball, everybody says, well, that's not going to happen to me. You get into a conflictual relationship and you don't have bylaws to be able to lean on and say, you know what, I have to be a good steward, just I am fiscally, to be in the same way with this, with the management and the organizational structure. We have to be able to uphold these things. And this is what we asked you to do and why we share this. Before, I was in a scenario where they didn't share the bylaws and the articles when they were coming on board membership. So there was really no even standard of expectation. I think that that's important to talk about, is that this creates and forces the foundations to be proactive, not only in their upkeep of documentations, but in communication to board members about conflict of interest. All those kind of things are stuff that can easily be, well, nobody's really checking and it just gets kind of washed up. Whereas if you're really being a steward of it, you have to get in front of those things. You have to be able to have those conversations. But I think it's also worth being able to say, without my early joke aside, right? I mean, I think that there's a big piece of this, that conflicts can be resolved so much easier with ongoing deep and personal engagement in relationships. I think that that's necessary to be talked about, which is before the conflict starts getting to a point, you say, you know what, it seems to me that this might not be the best fit for you, and that you're bringing a board member to their own kind of resolution before it has to be able to be leaned on inside of a way. It's so much easier and so much better to navigate when somebody, a board member, is consensually coming to that realization with you together for the betterment of the board, than it is to be able to even lean on having to go down that route. And so both of those things are equally important, but I definitely think as you navigate these waters, that you have both, that you really are secure on all fronts, but that you navigate it with empathy and emotional intelligence.
And to follow up on that, I think that there are two very key ways to make sure the conflicts of interest arise. If you have a very robust nominating committee, they will sniff out conflicts of interest. They will have a robust packet that has a number of disclosures, and so they'll be able to go through that. And then if you have a robust governance committee, if there arises a conflict among the members of the board, then the governance committee will usually handle that. That would be one of the things entrusted to their care, the handling of conflicts. And they would probably draft you a very robust conflict of interest form that your directors would be signing on an annual basis. And then if they lie on that, then it's very easy to get them off of the board.
I would say also too that within a conflict of interest policy, if the nomination committee discovers that there may be a conflict of interest, let's say board member Sally serves on Foundation A and Foundation B, and there might be some overlap. Perhaps there's a potential conflict of interest there. The problem isn't the potential for a conflict of interest. It's either the non-disclosing it until it becomes a problem, or it's really becomes a problem when it's not disclosed, because if it's disclosed ahead of time, you can consider whether this is a conflict of interest that both boards, your board, can navigate and can accept within some reason, or if it's a conflict of interest simply makes service impractical, and then you can address it early on at the nomination stage or early on in the development of the conflict of interest, versus trying to do damage control after the fact when, as Corey's alluded to, there are emotions and fiduciary responsibilities and perhaps even ego, if I can say that in a Catholic context, that ego involved. We're taught over and over again that the church is indefectively holy, right? Her members are not necessarily, and a good nominations committee and good conflict of interest declarations, disclosures are important at the get-go for navigating that.
So Elizabeth, let's stay with this for one more minute, and then we're going to pivot. But so all three of you have discussed the role of bylaws and strong documentation to assist in the identification and addressing conflicts of interest. And certainly that is all effective if you've got the right documentation. It is also the case that conflicts can arise after somebody is on a board. And it may be the case that there's a conflict that the person themselves may not recognize. What role does a self-evaluation process, which would be overseen by a governance committee, for example, what role can a self-evaluation process play in sort of sussing out conflicts?
Well, I think first of all, it can, as you've said, a person might not even realize there is a conflict, right? So that self-evaluation might, in fact, help a board member realize, oh, there could be a conflict. I need to talk to somebody about this. So it shifts the responsibility to the individual board member to consider what their other activities are. And I think that's a very effective tool for front loading the arise as conflict of interest that may arise. So I think that's one good benefit to having it. And it builds in periodic review into your board structure, which prevents your board becoming stagnant in its composition, in its work, in its mission. And so that ever renewing aspect of board participation is in play when you have self-evaluation.
Right. The self-evaluation can be helpful in so many ways to make sure that the governance structure is really healthy in every way. So my main takeaway from this conversation with the three of you is that you should not use cookie cutter documents to set up your foundation. The details really matter. They should reflect what your mission is, your Catholic values, a strong governance structure, depending on what you may need, strong processes, and also taking into account state laws and depending on where you're forming your foundation. So a lot goes into these documents that can really set you up for success, or if it's not addressed early on in the right way, it could have you trying to play catch up or fix things on the back end. Pivoting a little bit now, and this goes to some of the questions we had received in advance of the webinar, but Corey, I'm going to go to you and thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about really what are the key things you think about when you create a foundation, putting aside the legal documents. And I'm thinking in part about underwriting the initial costs of the operation, and what do those first few years look like? I mean, you started this from the ground up. What has your experience been in that respect?
No, it really is a fascinating journey when you're entrusted to this process, because I think one of those things, and what I'd really like to encourage, if anyone took away from any of that, is the donor integrity, the donor intention of this process. Being able to, often when you're starting an organization, it can so often and so quickly turn into more about the organization than about the donors that are helping fund this process. And so it is a dance of being able to cast your vision, be able to invite donors into this process, and then to be able to kind of pick a lane. I think the more that I'm in the foundation world with boots on the ground, you realize the sheer majority or the sheer vastness of donor intents are across the board. Some like quasi-endowed, some like endowed, some want, scholarship funds. I mean, there's so many options, donor advised for them. I mean, so inside that foundation, I think you need to really focus on what is the lane that's going to help you build capacity that sustains your mission in the first 2 or 3 years. And so to that point, I would even think that what we did when we were even rebranding as a Catholic Community Foundation is that your long-range planning, we end up having a long-range planning committee that was then committed to be able to not go on a 5-year plan. Some of these organizations go 5-year plans where we were being more proactive in a 12 to 18 month plan, so that we were being a little bit more reactive and with our ear to the ground, so that not only were we honoring the donors' intentions on this, but we were also making sure we weren't going so far down one road without being respectful of kind of the whole spectrum of where donors kind of approach this. so that our foundation also was not something created as our vision, but really the community's vision or the donor's vision. And so, so if that makes sense, I know it's a bit of a ramble. I think that there's some pieces there, but being reactive, really being able to set yourself up to respect the donor in that sense allows you to be able to then more clearly pick your lane, pick your specialty, and then really build out that part of your foundation. And that seems to have proved wise for us, but also respective of the donor in the process.
Great, John. How about you? Considerations in the first 12 to 36 months when you're first starting out?
Yeah, I think that the getting the right board is the first step. I think knowing where the assets are going to come from is another step. And I think funding the operation is the big issue that I've seen many foundations that have failed because they're worried about raising the money for their operations, and they're contemplating their own navel, and they can't get past that how am I going to build an endowment? So with a number of my clients, it's always made very clear that the diocese or the apostolate that is creating the foundation is making two gifts. They're making money, they're making a gift to the endowment, and they're making a gift to underwrite the cost of the operations for the first 3 to 5 years. I think that there should be a general expectation that when creating a diocesan foundation or another entity, you don't want to make grants for the first 3 to 5 years. You want to be able to grow the institution. You want the assets to mature so that you're making a grant. And to answer one of the questions that was presented in the question and answer session, you really want to sit on your money for 3 years and look at the 3-year average and then have the board make those grants. But I think once you get the institution running, you never want a foundation that's raising money for the operations of the foundation. That doesn't make sense. So you either need to have seed money from the founder, or you need to be able to make a draw every year from the endowment, from a percentage of the endowment, be it 1% or 2%, to fund operations. 2% is a little high, but at the beginning, that's fine. Or you want a board of directors that understands that they are making a gift not to the endowment, but to underwrite operations. And that's when you buy in. And the fourth, and I think that this is a wonderful thing, if you can do it, it takes time, it takes a lot of time, is you can actually create an endowed fund that underwrites operations. And it's a tough thing to raise money for, but there are donors who understand that by creating an endowed fund for operations, they are allowing the foundation to really blossom and go out and raise the funds that it needs for its
and to affirm that we've done that, and it's been a grandiose success and truly a deep way to engage the board in their financial gift every year, because then you're giving them options of their own funds that they could build, but then in addition to that, really being an advocate for the foundation, and that they appreciate your own commitment, personal commitment and board commitment to sustainability.
So on that point, how do you, this was a question we received in advance, how do you include this starting the endowment in your asks? How do you go about that?
Well, I'll share what we did, and Elizabeth, feel free to chime in. You know, when we came to the point of really asking, we thought of it, the person that really would have the capacity to be able to help seed it. It's always hard to be able to feel like you're starting something from the ground up. Anybody, it's like, is this ever going to get to a sustainable gift of that size? And so we were very intentional in the initial ask of that, so that then it felt like it was that people were giving to something successful. And then once we had an annual campaign or an annual ask of our board members for that fund, and especially through the years of market growth, it became kind of its selling of itself of saying, hey, I want to put this to the side and really kind of following returns and saying, this is exactly what I'm on the board for, is to be able to, we're building an entity that's going to serve our community, wherever you are, for eternity. And that is the real powerful piece for not only, I think, the board members, but also for the leadership, the Catholic, the trust and the clergy and the Episcopal leadership, to be able to say, look, they're really concerned about not just having their hand out for them to start, but they're really they're caring about creating this forever.
Great. Well, go ahead, John.
When you're first looking at creating a diocesan foundation or a foundation for a religious community or another apostolate, For the first 3 years, the largest donor is going to be either the diocese, the religious community, or the school or other institution. They're going to take funds that they have on their books and they are going to gift them to the foundation. Now, that's an important word to remember when creating and moving assets from the diocese to the foundation. It is a gift. You have alienated those funds. It's not a transfer. It's not a deposit. It is a gift. Those funds are gone. And there's something that I think a lot of foundations and when creating foundations, the dioceses and other entities don't look at. The Code of Canon Law actually requires that when alienating funds, you have to seek the approval of the College of Consultors and the Finance Council. And I think that that's something that's very important for dioceses to remember, that when they are going to move a few $1 million of restricted assets to a separate entity, that is a gifting of those. It's an alienation of those funds, and the code has a requirement for that. But I think really when you're looking at the first few years, it's going to be the beneficiary that's the largest donor.
Great, thank you, John. So what I'd like to do is perhaps begin to wrap things up, but we'll go through and ask each one of you the same question. Before we get to that, there's one more question we had in the Q&A, and Corey, I'm going to send it your way, which is, how does a Catholic foundation compete with secular local community foundations or with low-cost options?
Sure, I love the question, and we get it actually more than you would imagine. And here's the best part. We don't, and I say that, I always say that what we're offering, not only our investment services side of having that, it's such a unique piece with socially responsible investing, is not only such a unique piece to be able to be there, but it's also that we're building a community in a different way that supports our faith. And so when you give a gift to a Catholic community, besides to just a community foundation or a secular foundation out there, I think what we're very intentional on is the things, sometimes tangible, sometimes non-tangible, that we offer them to connect with. And not only a unified voice to build confidence in their faith, but also an evangelistic nature of what we do is being able to combine our efforts to be able to push ourselves out into the world, to show that we do hold hands with the community, the secular community, through values like generosity, but that our values are pushed and are affected in as a result of our faith. And so in some sense, we see this as an act of faith, not just an act of humanitarian generosity. And I think that those are the pieces that really help kind of push out and delineate us, not as in a way that you're unfaithful if you do that, but just as an attraction and a celebration of Catholic generosity that's different than others.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to switch gears even as I thought what the ending was be. So I'm going to send another question that's come in, Elizabeth, to you, and then we'll end with you, John. And the question for you will be, John, are there any other 2 or 3 pitfalls that we haven't discussed that people should just keep in mind briefly? But Elizabeth, for you, the question is, I've talked with dioceses who have committee or board members who do not care about incorporating Catholic social teaching into the portfolio. How do you suggest tackling this issue with the board? You're on mute.
I think the first way you have to address that is identifying the mission of the foundation, and if it's supporting the diocese, the mission of that diocese. And secondly, within the nominations process, within gathering board members, if that is important, if promoting Catholic social teaching or particular aspects of Catholic social justice is important to the diocese of the foundation, you have to have board members who share in that vision. If there's not a shared vision, it's not going to work. So within the Archdiocese for the Military Services, the vision is very clear. The mission is very clear. It's to provide Catholic pastoral support to members of the military services, VA, and their families, to have enough to preach the gospel, to have enough priests to do that, and to keep the light, to fund it, to be able to fund that. If a board member doesn't share in that vision, every single one of our board members will say, I was attracted to serve on the foundation board because of it being Catholic and military. It's 2 vocations, right? Being a Catholic and being a service member. It's a vocation within vocation. If your board member doesn't share in that vision, then they're not a good fit for your board, and it's okay to say no. So if Catholic social teaching or particular aspect of social justice is important to the vision of the foundation of the diocese, your board members have to share the vision, and no is okay.
Thank you. John, 2 pitfalls we didn't discuss.
Two pitfalls that I could go on for hours about.
I know, but we have like a minute.
Yeah,
So-
I'll just go back to, I think, 2 things that we touched on, but we didn't really tie it together. At the end of the day, it's all on the board. The board is responsible for this institution. I was at the promotion of a 1-star general, and the 4-star, when he put that star on the 1-star's shoulder, he said to him, and he was a priest, "Father, this star is not about what you've done. It's about what's expected of you. Board members, you're not on the board because of what you've done. You're there because something is expected to you. And if you're not willing to do the work, then get off the board." And I think that the one thing that I would say to the members who are on this, we have 75 people, go back to your boards. If you're governing an institution right now, ask at the next board meeting, how many of you have read the bylaws? And if the board doesn't raise their hand, then they're not doing their job because they're not committed to the institution. And I would suggest that the way to make sure that institutions are moving forward is to have a board retreat where you focus solely on you contemplate your navel for a day and you talk about what is our expectation and what are we here to do and how are we doing it and how are we not doing it.
Amen, John.
Excellent. Thank you, John. What a great way to end the panel. I want to thank Elizabeth, Corey, and John for their wisdom and for sharing their experience. And Zela, I'm going to turn it over to you.
This was a really nice discussion. Thank you, everybody. There's going to be a quick audience survey feedback right after we log off here. So feel free to take 2 seconds. I promise it's very quick. Also, feel free to email us with any questions you may have at info@catholicinvest.org. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the holidays and please be healthy and safe. Thank you.